Elena Vance felt the cold metal of the delivery table beneath her shaking hands. It was meant to be the happiest day of her life. Her husband, Julian, the CEO of Vance Pharmaceuticals, was allegedly stuck in a traffic collision. But her best friend, Clara Thorne, was there, clutching her hand with a grip that felt more like a shackle than a comfort. "It's gone, Elena," Clara whispered, her voice devoid of the expected sorrow. "The baby. Stillborn. A tragedy, really." Elena felt the world tilt. "No, I heard it cry. I know I heard it." "You're hallucinating from the anesthesia," Clara said, leaning in. Her eyes, usually warm and sisterly, were sharp, cold glass. "Julian and I have discussed it. The stress of your instability caused this. It's for the best." Elena wanted to scream, but the sedative Clara had insisted on was thick in her veins. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the hospital room. She didn't know then that the man she loved and the woman she called sister had been sharing a bed for 3 years, and that the stillborn child was currently being whisked away to be used as a bargaining chip in a corporate takeover. 3 weeks later, Elena was a shell. She was confined to a private wing of her husband's high-end clinic, forced to take rehabilitative medication that made the walls crawl. "You're pathetic," Julian said, walking into her room. He didn't look at her. He looked at his watch. "The press thinks you're grieving. The public likes a tragic widow in waiting. Just keep quiet, keep taking the pills, and maybe I won't have you committed permanently." That night, Elena realized the truth. She found a discarded file in the trash, a prenatal report. Her baby hadn't been stillborn. It had been sold to a donor family to secure Julian's seat on the board of the city's most powerful consortium. She wasn't going to die here. She was going to burn. Elena waited until the night shift nurse was distracted by the brewing storm outside. She set a small, controlled fire in the linen closet, knowing exactly where the oxygen tanks were stored. As the alarms shrieked and the hospital descended into chaos, she didn't run for the exit. She ran for the basement, where she had been hiding small amounts of cash and a burner phone for months. When the fire department found the charred remains of a woman in the suite, they identified her by the heirloom bracelet she always wore. They never checked the dental records. Julian had paid the coroner handsomely to expedite the process. 5 years later, the gala at the Starlight Plaza was the talk of the city. Everyone who was anyone was there, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive lady of the ivory tower. The mysterious heiress of the overseas conglomerate, Hart Global Elena, stood on the balcony, watching her reflection in the glass. She was no longer Elena Vance. She was Chloe Hart, a woman with a sharp mind, a freezing stare, and a bank account that made Julian Vance's empire look like a lemonade stand. Her goal was simple: total annihilation. As she entered the ballroom, she saw them. Julian, looking as arrogant as ever, holding the arm of Clara Thorne. Clara was wearing a necklace that Elena recognized, an heirloom that had belonged to her mother. "Julian," Elena said, her voice cool and unfamiliar. Julian turned, his eyes widening. He saw a woman who looked like his dead wife's ghost, yet possessed the poise of a queen. "Do I know you?" "I'm Chloe Hart," she said, extending a hand she knew he couldn't refuse. "And I believe your company is currently in desperate need of an investor, isn't it?" "I'm looking to expand into pharmaceuticals. I hear your company is unstable." Clara laughed nervously. "We're doing quite well, actually." "Are you?" Chloe asked, her eyes boring into Clara's. "Because I've been looking at the books. It seems you've been selling assets that don't belong to you. I'd be very careful, Clara. Ghosts have a way of coming back to claim what's theirs." The air in the boardroom was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and desperation. Julian Vance sat at the head of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his tablet. Hart Global, specifically the enigmatic Chloe Hart, hadn't just offered an investment. She had effectively cornered the market on his company's debt. "Miss Hart," Julian began, his voice strained, "the terms you've laid out, they give you a controlling interest in the board. That's not an investment. That's a hostile takeover." Elena, now Chloe, leaned back, her gaze flickering to Clara, who sat at Julian's right hand, fidgeting with her rings. "Mr. Vance, your company is hemorrhaging cash due to mismanagement. I'm simply providing the tourniquet. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to explain to your shareholders why your stock has plummeted by 40% this quarter." Clara interjected, her voice sickly sweet. "We have internal strategies to cover, Chloe. We don't need to surrender our autonomy to a stranger." Chloe stood up, walking slowly around the table until she stopped directly behind Clara. She leaned down, whispering into Clara's ear. "I'm not a stranger, Clara. I'm the person who knows exactly where you hid the offshore accounts." Clara froze. Her face turned a ghostly pale. That evening, Chloe met with her private investigator, a man named Marcus, who had been loyal to her family for decades. They sat in a dimly lit cafe. "The child?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling for the first time. Marcus shook his head grimly. "Julian didn't raise the boy. He sold the adoption rights to a shell company. The trail went cold in the northern provinces, but I found a lead. A woman who worked as a nurse in that private clinic 5 years ago. She's currently living in poverty, terrified of Julian's men." "Find her," Chloe commanded. "And Marcus, make sure the medical records at the clinic are audited. I want to know exactly what they gave me during those rehabilitative sessions. I suspect they were drugging me to induce the hallucinations." Clara Thorne was spiraling. She found herself seeing things: a flash of a white address in a mirror, the sound of a baby crying in the static of her phone. She was convinced the dead Elena was haunting her. She confronted Julian in their shared apartment. "She's here, Julian. I saw her at the gala. She looks exactly like her." Julian grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her. "Elena is dead. We saw the body." "You're losing your mind, Clara. Maybe you need a vacation, or perhaps a dose of the same medicine we gave her." Clara stared at him in horror. He didn't care about her. He only cared about the leverage she provided. She realized then that she was next on the chopping block if the company failed. Chloe orchestrated a private dinner, inviting Julian and Clara to her estate. She played the perfect host, serving vintage wine and gourmet appetizers. "I'm considering pulling my offer," Chloe said casually, swirling her glass. "Unless, of course, the two of you can explain why a significant portion of Vance Pharma's research budget was diverted to a private account under the name E. Vance's 3 days after her funeral." Julian scoffed. "That's a clerical error. My accountant." "Your accountant is currently in police custody," Chloe interrupted, smiling thinly. "He's singing like a canary. Teet told them everything about the fake death certificate, the misappropriated funds, and the illegal medical trials." The panic was visible now. Julian tried to leave, but the doors were locked from the outside. "What is this?" Julian roared. Chloe pulled a remote from her clutch and pressed a button. The large television mounted on the wall flickered to life. It began playing a recording, not of themating, but of the very hospital room where Elena had been confined 5 years ago. It was an audio of Julian and Clara plotting to dispose of the inconvenient wife. "It's not just a ghost story, is it, Julian?" Chloe asked. "It's a confession." As the police siren wailed in the distance, Chloe watched the two of them crumble. Clara began to sob, her sanity fracturing under the weight of the surveillance. She started confessing to everything, pointing the finger at Julian, claiming he had forced her to swap the babies and stage the fire. Julian lashed out at her. And for a moment, the two of them devolved into a brawl, tearing at each other's clothes and reputations, their masks of sophistication completely stripped away. Chloe stood above them, an observer of her own vengeance. She had promised herself she wouldn't feel pity, and as she looked at them, she felt nothing but cold, hard satisfaction. The police burst in, led by an officer who had been tipped off by Marcus. Julian and Clara were dragged out in handcuffs, their faces splattered across the digital news outlets before they even reached the station. Chloe sat in the silence of her estate. She pulled out a small, worn photograph, the only one she had left of her child. "I'm coming for you," she whispered to the empty room. But as she turned to leave, her burner phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I know you're not Chloe Hart, and I know you're looking for the boy. Meet me at the docks at midnight." The game, she realized, was far from over. The docks were shrouded in a thick, suffocating fog that smelled of brine and rotting wood. Chloe stood at the edge of the pier, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight. She was armed, not with a weapon, but with the ruthless knowledge that her enemies were currently rotting in a holding cell. A dark sedan rolled to a halt 20 yards away. A man emerged, tall, gaunt, and wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the derelict shipyard. He held a manila envelope. "You're bold, Mrs. Vance," the man said, his voice raspy. "Or should I call you Miss Hart? The authorities are still trying to piece together the paper trail of your assets. You've moved a lot of money in 5 years. Who are you?" Chloe demanded, stepping forward. "I'm the man who bought your son," he replied, tossing the envelope onto the wet pavement between them. Julian thought he was selling the boy to a faceless consortium. He didn't realize he was selling him to a rival who wanted to raiseth heir of the Vance fortune for his own purposes. Opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were medical photos, updated records, and a single address in a remote coastal town. "Why give this to me?" Chloe asked, her eyes searching his. The man stepped into the light, revealing a scarred face that looked vaguely familiar. "Because I don't want a child. I want the destruction of the consortium that Julian worked for. They betrayed me years ago, and by helping you dismantle their puppet, I've completed my own revenge. Consider us allies for now." He turned to leave, then paused. "But be warned, Chloe. Others know you survived, and they aren't as merciful as I am." While Chloe was at the docks, the news of Julian's arrest had sent shockwaves through the city. Back at the station, Julian was in a full-blown frenzy. "It's a setup," he screamed at the detective. "Chloe Hart isn't real. She's an imposter. You need to check the DNA, the records. She's a ghost." The detective sighed, sliding a document across the table. "We did, Mr. Vance. Her fingerprints are legally registered in 3 countries. Her assets are verified. She is exactly who she says she is. You're just a desperate man trying to drag a prominent philanthropist down with you." Julian collapsed into his chair, defeated. But his eyes drifted to the window, where a shadow stood watching him from across the street. It was someone who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. A silent partner. Chloe hadn't yet identified. Chloe traveled to the coastal town of Oakhaven. It was a quiet, unassuming place where time seemed to stand still. She walked toward the address provided in the envelope, a modest cottage with a flower garden. She stood at the gate for 10 minutes, her heart hammering against her ribs. What if he didn't remember her? What if he was happy where he was? She pushed the gate open. A young boy, no older than 5, was playing with a toy airplane in the yard. He looked up, his eyes wide and curious. He had Julian's chin, but he had her eyes, the same deep, inquisitive hazel that she saw in the mirror every day. "Are you lost?" the boy asked, wiping his dusty hands on his trousers. Chloe fell to her knees, the tears finally breaking through her resolve. I'm a friend of your family, sweetheart. I just wanted to see how you were redoing." Before the boy could answer, a woman emerged from the house. She wasn't a rich socialite or a corporate rival. She was a simple, kind-looking woman with weary eyes. She looked at Chloe, then at the boy, and then back at Chloe. She didn't ask who Chloe was. She simply sighed, her shoulders slumping as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. "You're the mother, aren't you?" They sat in the cottage kitchen, the smell of fresh tea filling the room. Thuoman, Martha, explained that she had been paid to adopt the boy, but she had grown to love him as her own. "They told me the mother had died in a fire," Martha said, her voice shaking. "But I never believed it. No mother leaves a child behind like that without a fight." "I was trapped," Chloe said, her voice hard. "But I've paid my debt to those who hurt me. I want to take him home. I want to give him the life he deserves." "You can't just take him," Martha whispered. "The people who paid for this, they have eyes everywhere. If you take him, they'll know you're alive. They'll kill you both." Chloe spent the night in a local inn, her mind racing. She realized that Marcus, her PI, hadn't been entirely honest. The rival, who gave her the address, had set her up. He didn't want the consortium dismantled. He wanted her to lead them right to her son, so he could hold the boy as a bargaining chip for his own power play. She looked at her laptop, accessing the encrypted files she had stolen from Julian's office. She realized with a jolt that there was a hidden folder titled Project Phoenix. It wasn't a pharmaceutical project. It was a list of names, the secret financiers of Julian's company. Her own mother's name was on the list. Chloe realized that her mother, who she thought had died in an accident years ago, might have been involved in the very plot that sold her son. The complexity of the web was far deeper than she had ever imagined. She called Marcus, her voice icy. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me my mother was a financier of the consortium?" There was a long silence on the other end. "Because I was told you weren't ready to know that Julian didn't set the fire that destroyed your hospital room, Chloe." "Your mother's estate said it." Chloe gripped the phone, her knuckles whitening. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her vengeance against Julian was just the surface. Her real battle was against her own blood. "Would you like to proceed with the next set of chapters?" 1925, where Chloe confronts her dead mother and prepares for the final war. The realization that her own mother, Elena Vance, née Harrington, was the architect of the consortium changed everything. Chloe sat in the dark hotel room staring at the digital copies of the financial ledgers. Every payment, every signature, and every incidental corporate merger traced back to a trust held in her mother's name. Her mother hadn't died in a car accident 5 years ago. She had faked it to consolidate her control over the family's secret influence. She had used Julianus, a pawn, to prune away the weak elements of the family, including Chloe herself. "You aren't a daughter to her," Marcus said, his voice coming through the phone with a newfound caution. "You're an asset that got out of control, and assets that don't perform are liquidated." Chloe's phone rang. The caller ID was blocked. She answered, expecting the man from the docks. Instead, she heard a voice that made her blood run cold, a voice she hadn't heard in a decade. "Chloe, darling," the voice crooned, smooth as silk and sharp as a blade. "I must say, your performance as Chloe Hart has been spectacular. Truly, I'm impressed by the way you dismantled Julian. He was always such a clumsy brute." "Mother," Chloe whispered, her grip tightening on the phone. "You're alive. I am as alive as you choose to be," her mother replied. "Bring my grandson to the estate in the hills. Let's have a family reunion. And don't bother bringing the police. I have the boy's medication, and he's not feeling very well today." Chloe's world shattered. The boy, her son, was already in Eleanor's clutches. She couldn't call the authorities. Her mother's influence reached into the DA's office and the local police precinct. She turned to Martha, who was huddled in the kitchen, terrified. "She has him," Chloe said, her voice eerily calm. "I have to go. She'll kill you the moment you walk through those doors," Martha cried. "Maybe," Chloe said, pulling a compact, high-tech device from her bag, a scrambler for the security grid. "But she won't kill me until she's finished playing with her toy. I have to make her think she's won, right up until the moment I tear her empire down." Eleanor's estate was a fortress of glass and steel, perched atop a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Chloe drove up the winding road, her hands steady on the wheel. She wasn't arriving as a beggar. She was arriving as the predator. As she entered the grand foyer, the doors locked behind her with a heavy final thud. Eleanor stood by the fireplace, sipping tea, looking exactly as she hadn't years ago, ageless and cruel. "You look so much like me," Eleanor said, gesturing to a chair. "It's a pity. If you had just stayed dead, you could have been my successor." "Where is he?" Chloe asked, not moving. "In the nursery." "Sleeping," Eleanor smiled. "He's such a bright child." He asked why his new grandma wanted him to be so quiet. Eleanor pushed a cup toward Chloe. "Drink. We have so much to discuss. The consortium needs a new lead, and honestly, you've proven you have the ruthlessness required." Chloe looked at the tea, then at her mother. She picked up the cup, swirled the contents, and poured it into a potted plant nearby. Eleanor's smile vanished. "You always were stubborn. I learned from the best," Chloe replied. "But you made one mistake, Mother. You assumed that because I was looking for the boy, I wasn't also looking for your exit strategy. I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I know about the bribes you paid to the medical board. I've already uploaded the Felesto a dead man's switch. If I don't check in by dawn, the entire global press gets your life story." Eleanor's hand moved toward a remote on the table, the one that controlled these security alarms. Chloe was faster. She leaped over the table, pinning her mother's hand to the wood. "Don't," Chloe warned. "I'm not the girl you sent to the asylum. I'm the woman you created." Suddenly, the house's lights flickered. A man walked into the foyer. It was Theman from the docks, the one who had given Chloe the address. He wasn't an ally of Chloe's. He was Eleanor's chief enforcer. "You shouldn't have come, Chloe," the enforcer said, pulling a silenced pistol. "The mother always wins." Chloe didn't flinch. She tapped a sequence into her watch. Immediately, the estate's fire suppression system engaged, not with water, but with a thick, blinding chemical foam that filled the room in seconds. In the confusion, Chloe didn't try to fight the man. She dove for the hallway, following the sound of a child's muffled cry. She reached the nursery, burst through the door, and scooped her son into her arms. She sprinted for the back terrace where a helicopter, piloted by Marcus, who had been playing both sides to ensure his own survival, was waiting with its rotor spinning. As they lifted off, Chloe looked down. The estate was erupting in a series of controlled explosions she had spent her last millions orchestrating. The ledger, the mansion, the evidence. Everything was burning. She held her son close, his small heart beating against her own. The past waste-turning to ash, and for the first time in years, the future was hers to write. "We have reached the end of the major tension arc. Do you want to continue with the final aftermath? The settling of scores, the final legal battles, and the life they build together?" The helicopter hovered over the coast, the sound of the ocean churning beneath them. Below, the cliffside estate of the Harrington legacy was a skeleton of scorched steel. Marcus, his face grim, kept his eyes on the horizon. "They'll be combing the debris for days," Marcus said. Eleanor had a private bunker beneath the wine cellar. She might have survived the blast. Chloe didn't look back. She clutched her son, Leo, who was still groggy from the tranquilizer Eleanor had used. Let her crawl out of the ashes if she can. She'll find there's nothing left to rule. Her bank accounts are frozen. Her associates are being picked up by Interpol as we speak. And her legacy is currently being leaked to every major news outlet in the world. 2 weeks later, the world was still reeling. The Harrington scandal had toppled 3 senators and 2 tech CEOs. In a quiet, secluded villa in the Swiss Alps, Chloe, now legally adopting the name Elena Vance, watched Leo play in the snow. She had shed the Chloe Hart identity as easily as she had shed her old life. She was no longer a ghost, and she was no longer a weapon. She was a mother. However, the peace was interrupted by a courier, a single, plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a dried, scorched piece of paper. A scrap from Harold's wedding photo with Julian. The one she had thought was burned in the fire. On the back, written in familiar, shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "I'm coming back." Julian Vance sat in a high-security prison cell, his skin gaunt, his eyes hollow. He had nothing left, but he had time. And in prison, time was a currency. He had bribed a guard to smuggle out the message. He knew Eleanor was alive. He knew she had retreated to a hidden facility in the mountains. And he knew that as long as they both drew breath, they could still hurt the one thing Serena cared about, her son. In a brutal, concrete room deep in the mountains, Eleanor Harrington sat across from Julian. She was scarred, her hair shorn, her face a mask of bitterness. "You failed," Eleanor spat. "You couldn't keep her down." "I was blinded by my own ego," Julian replied, his voice devoid of the arrogance that had once defined him. "But I have the location. She's in Switzerland. If we work together, if we pool the last of our resources to hire the mercenaries, don't ask questions, we can take her out, and we can reclaim the boy." "And the consortium?" Eleanor asked. "There is no consortium," Julian said. "There is only revenge." Back in the Swiss villa, Serena had sensed the storm coming. She had spent the last month training, not just with lawyers and financiers, but with professionals in security and tactical defense. She knew her mother and Julian would never simply disappear. She went to the nursery, where Leo was sleeping. She sat by his bed, her hand resting on his back. She wasn't the broken woman who had set the fire at the hospital anymore. She was the one who had walked through the flames and mastered them. A vibration on her tactical tablet alerted her. The perimeter sensors were triggered. 3 heat signatures are approaching from the north. The night was silent. Save for the crunch of boots on fresh powder, Serena didn't hide. She stepped out onto the balcony, a high-caliber light aimed at the tree line. "I know you're there," she called out, her voice echoing through the valley. From the shadows, Julian stepped out, his hand clutching a pistol. Eleanor followed, looking like a wraith in the moonlight. "Give us the boy, Serena," Eleanor commanded, her voice devoid of maternal warmth. "And maybe you can disappear again. For real this time? You want the heir to a fortune that no longer exists?" Serena laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "There is no Vance empire. There is no Harrington fortune. I donated it all to the victims of the consortium. You're coming for a ghost, and you're going to die for a lie." Julian lunged, but he was slower than he used to be, his health ruined by prison life. Serena didn't hesitate. She didn't use the gun. She used the very security system she had installed, a series of localized charges she had wired to the villa's perimeter. With a click of her remote, the ground around the attackers exploded in controlled, non-lethal flashes, blinding them. She moved with precision, disarming Julian and pinning Eleanor to the ground. "You took my life," Serena whispered, leaning over her mother. "You took my child. And you thought you could do it again?" Police lights pierced the darkness. Serena had summoned the local authorities, who were now swarming the villa. She had recorded the entire confrontation, including their admission of intent to kidnap. As they were dragged away, screaming and struggling, Serena didn't feel the triumph of a queen. She felt the lightness of a soul finally unburdened. Months later, the media had moved on to other scandals. The names Vance and Harrington was now synonymous with cautionary tales of greed. Serena stood on the deck of a boat in the Mediterranean, the sun warm on her face. Leo ran to her, holding a seashell. "Look, Mommy, it's beautiful." She took it from him, smiling. Her past was a long, dark corridor, but she had finally stepped out of it. She pulled her phone from her pocket, looked at the photo of Julian and Eleanor behind bars, and deleted it. She turned the phone off and dropped it into the deep blue water. The waves closed over the phone, taking the last of her secrets with them. She looked at her son, then at the horizon. She had been a daughter, a wife, a victim, and a ghost. Now she was just Serena, and for the first time that was enough.